It's a Tuesday afternoon, 1993. School ended maybe 40 minutes ago, and the neighborhood is already alive. A few kids are cutting through backyards. Two boys arguing over whose turn it is on the driveway hoop. Someone riding a bike with no destination at all. A girl sitting on the curb with a jump rope, not really jumping, just waiting to see who comes out next. Nobody is checking a phone. Nobody is asking permission. You leave the house, and the street becomes your world for a while. That was normal, not a memory, not nostalgia, just normal. And if you grew up in America around that time, you probably remember the feeling without even trying. The day had a shape, but it wasn't fully controlled. There were gaps, empty hours, pockets of time where nothing was scheduled except whatever you and your friends decided to invent. Then, somehow, that started to fade. Not all at once, not in a single moment anyone remembers, just gradually. By the late 1990s, the streets began to empty after school. Fewer bikes, fewer pickup games, fewer kids wandering in loose packs from one block to the next. By the time supervision and screens became the new default, a whole style of childhood had already quietly disappeared. So, what happened? The answer is not one thing. It's three things that arrived in the same decade, hit the same generation, and pointed in the same direction. Fear, scheduling, screens. And the reason this matters is that most people explain this story wrong. They blame their parents, or smartphones, or some vague drift called modern life, as if the answer is obvious and nobody just noticed. The real answer is harder than that. Kids did not disappear from American streets because Americans stopped loving outdoor play. They disappeared because the conditions that made outdoor play ordinary, easy, expected, unsupervised, were slowly, quietly removed, one shift at a time. And once those conditions were gone, the street was lost. To the home, to the car, to the calendar, to the screen. Before we get into how, there is something you need to know that most people have backwards. The 1990s were not more dangerous for children. They were statistically safer than the decade before. So why did an entire generation of parents suddenly decide the street wasn't safe? That question is the center of this whole story. To understand the first shift, you have to go back to 1979. A 6-year-old boy named Etan Patz walked to his school bus stop in New York City alone for the first time. He never came home. His face became one of the first to appear on a milk carton. 2 years later, in 1981, 6-year-old Adam Walsh was abducted and murdered in Florida. His father, John Walsh, would spend the rest of his life as one of America's most visible child safety advocates. Then came October 22, 1989. An 11-year-old boy named Jacob Wetterling rode his bike to a video store in Minnesota with his younger brother and a friend. On the way home, a masked man appeared on the road. He grabbed Jacob. He told the other boys to run and not look back. They ran. Jacob's case went unsolved for 27 years. By 1994, Congress had passed the Jacob Wetterling Act, one of the first federal laws requiring sex offender registration across every state in America. That law reflected something that had been building for a decade, through milk cartons, through after-school safety programs, through nightly news coverage that felt relentless and overwhelming. And here is where the story becomes uncomfortable. A parent does not live inside a chart. A parent lives inside imagination. And the imagination, fed by a decade of news stories exactly like these, said one thing clearly: danger is everywhere. The data said something different. According to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, non-fatal violent victimization of juveniles fell 85% from 1993 to 2022. The street was not becoming more dangerous. It was becoming dramatically safer. At the exact moment parents became most afraid of it. But fear does not wait for data. So a child who used to walk to a friend's house now gets dropped off. A child who used to bike around the block is told to stay where adults can see. A child who used to disappear for 2 hours comes home every 20 minutes. Parents called it caution. What it became, slowly, without anyone deciding it, was a new rule. The street is no longer a default space for children, but fear alone doesn't explain why streets went quiet even in neighborhoods where crime was never really the concern. Because in many American suburbs, the streets weren't actually dangerous. They were just no longer empty. By the 1990s, American childhood had quietly shifted. Sports became year-round. Lessons started younger, and somewhere in that well-meaning shuffle, the empty Tuesday afternoon, the one with nothing scheduled, nothing planned, nowhere to be, quietly disappeared. The American family had slowly moved from a model of go play to something that sounded more like go build your future. That doesn't sound wrong. In a lot of ways, it isn't. But it carried a hidden cost that nobody put on the calendar. Free time started to feel like a problem to solve. An idle afternoon became a missed opportunity. A kid outside doing nothing in particular no longer looked like childhood. It started to look like falling behind. Research published in the Archives of Pediatrics and Adolescent Medicine found that children's free playtime dropped by roughly 25% between 1981 and 1997. A quarter of childhood freedom gone in less than 2 decades. And the reason this shift is so easy to miss is that it doesn't feel like control. It feels like care. Parents weren't saying, "I don't want my child to play." They were saying, "I want my child to do well." And in the modern American middle class, those two things slowly came to compete with each other. Outdoor play used to happen because it had nowhere else to go. Now it had a schedule to compete with, and the schedule won. Then came the screens, first television, then cable, then video games, then the early internet. At first, they didn't replace the street completely. They just made staying inside more rewarding, because a child doesn't need to be forced indoors if indoors becomes more interesting than outside. Outside, there is boredom, there is weather, there is the slow, awkward work of figuring out what to do with nothing. Inside, there is instant response. The story starts immediately. A level load, a show plays, a world appears, already built, already interesting, already asking nothing of you except to watch. That competition was never fair. But here is the thing nobody usually says out loud. The screens were not forced on kids. Children chose them, freely, happily, because screens genuinely were more stimulating than an empty street. They offered story, color, challenge, reward, all of it immediate, all of it certain. The street offered something else entirely: boredom, uncertainty, the uncomfortable space between wanting something to happen and having to make it happen yourself. And researchers now argue that space, that specific, uncomfortable, unscheduled space, was doing something no screen has ever replaced. It was building the part of the brain that handles creativity, problem solving, and the ability to sit with uncertainty without falling apart. But by the time that research became clear, the habit was already formed. The street was lost. Now here is the part of this story that doesn't add up. The common assumption is that Outdoor play declined because America became more dangerous. But look at what actually happened. The violent crime rate in the United States fell 49% between 1993 and 2022. According to FBI data, juvenile arrests fell 71% from 1995 to 2019. Sexual assaults on teenagers decreased by 52% between 1993 and 2005. The streets were not getting more dangerous. They were getting dramatically, measurably safer at the exact moment that parents became most afraid of them. Not that the danger was real, but that fear was real, even when the danger wasn't growing. Jacob Wetterling's abduction didn't make America more dangerous. It made America more afraid. And fear, once it settles into a culture, does not wait for evidence. It changes behavior. It redesigns childhood. It clears the street long before any real threat arrives. The kids didn't leave because the world became unsafe. The kids left because the adults, slowly, quietly, over many years, were taught to believe it had. And once that belief took hold, it didn't feel like fear anymore. It felt like good parenting. Think back for a second. What's the last thing you remember doing outside as a kid? Completely unsupervised? Riding your bike until the streetlights came on? Playing in an empty parking lot? Building something in the backyard that had no use and no point except that you wanted to build it? For a lot of people, that memory has a specific age attached to it. Not because it was the last time they ever went outside, but because it was the last time outside I felt open. Drop that age in the comments. I want to see how much it changed across generations. American streets did not go quiet overnight. They went quiet one fear at a time, one scheduled afternoon at a time, one screen at a time. And that is what makes this story so difficult to argue with, because nothing about it feels like a single decision. It feels like 1,000 reasonable decisions that all pointed quietly in the same direction. Parents wanted safety. Parents wanted an opportunity. Parents wanted the best for the kids they loved. And the result was a childhood that became more protected, more optimized, and less free. The kids did not disappear. They were relocated from the street to the schedule, from the block to the backseat, from the neighborhood to the network. And now, for the first time in a long time, a lot of adults are sitting quietly with the same question. What exactly did we trade away?